Casey Lee Johnson, who was 27 years old, was known as a kind person according to her partner, Beulah Berdinsky. They were in a relationship and connected because they both were transgender. Casey worked at a Domino's Pizza in Wilmington, North Carolina, and was well-liked by her coworkers. When she wasn't working, Casey enjoyed relaxing and watching anime. However, in January 2023, Casey disappeared suddenly and no one knows what happened to her. Months later, the disturbing truth would finally surface. January 13th, 2023 started as a typical day for Casey and Bella. The two went to work, came home, and readied themselves for a night of anime. At some point that evening, Casey announced that she needed to leave their home in the 1900 block of Trad Court. Casey assured Bella that she'd be gone for an hour, but she never returned. When an hour had passed, Bella started calling Casey, but there was never any answer. Worried, Bella took to the streets of Wilmington to look for her partner. They even began searching the woods near their home, hoping to find any sign of Casey. Casey's social media was scrutinized, but there was never any activity. Bella eventually reported her partner missing to the Wilmington Police Department, and the search for Casey began. Casey's family was also notified of her disappearance. The LGBTQ+ community of Wilmington banded together and held vigils for Casey's safe return. On January 18, 2023, investigators in Georgia were called to the discovery of a body on the banks of the Savannah River near Sugar Refinery. The body showed signs of brutality and investigators were desperate to uncover the victim's identity. According to reports, it took until April 2023 for the remains to be positively identified as missing 27-year-old Casey Lee Johnson. Months before Casey's remains were discovered, the Wilmington Police Department named a suspect in her disappearance, 26-year-old William Haven Hicks. Investigators believe that William and Casey met on a social media, possibly a dating app, and met on January 13th. Williams was arrested in South Carolina and was being extradited to North Carolina. Casey was held hostage by William and taken to another location before being beaten to death with a hammer. William also stole her purse, ID, and $100 in cash. The Wilmington Police Department noted that William transported her from one place to another, held her hostage for ransom in involuntary servitude, caused serious bodily harm, and terrorized her. William Haven Hicks is currently in custody and is facing charges of first-degree murder robbery with a dangerous weapon and kidnapping. The case is due to be presented to a grand jury in the coming weeks. Casey's sister, Amber, has created a GoFundMe to help with funeral expenses for Casey. What do you think about it? Tell us your thoughts in comments below. Let's continue. Before we proceed, I've got an exciting surprise for you. We've launched a brand new channel dedicated to intriguing content such as old historical mysteries, cold cases, and particularly chilling horror stories perfect for bedtime. Drop a comment letting us know if you're a fan of horror stories or not. You can find the link in the description below. Let's find out who will be the first to explore it. Alright, let's dive back into the video. On October 21st, 2020, 48-year-old Trent Pascal recorded a disturbing video that had been made for his daughter and stepson. In the video's final moments, Trent can be seen walking into the bathroom and getting into the shower. However, once the camera was off, Trent jumped out in front of his wife, 30-year-old Savannah Pascal, as she was walking into the master bedroom. He shot her several times, with 2 fatal shots being made to her abdomen. Samantha's children were still at school when the entire event unfolded, and Samantha's mother, who was also in the house, managed to escape without injury. Following the shooting, Trent fled their home in La Marquis, Texas in his gray Chevrolet pickup truck. Samantha's mother ran into the home and called 911. When she arrived in the master bedroom, she found her daughter in a pool of blood. According to reports, a neighbor overheard Trent on the phone with Savannah's aunt as he was fleeing the scene. During the call, Trent confessed to having murdered Savannah. The Harris County Sheriff's Office was dispatched to the scene and additional officers were sent to track Trent down. Tips and leads were called in minutes after the shooting and police confronted Trent at a Walmart store on West Road on the I-45 North in Houston, and even threatened to shoot responding officers. In response, Trent was shot several times in the leg, upper body, and arms in order to subdue him. Trent was arrested and taken to the nearest hospital for treatment. Doctors determined that his injuries were not life-threatening, and after spending weeks in the hospital, he was released into custody at the Harris County Sheriff's Office in late 2020. Trent Pascal was extradited to the Galveston County where the murder occurred to face the courts. Disturbingly, Trent was released on a $450,000 bond with an additional $100,000 bail from the Harris County incident. Law enforcement was supposed to keep a close eye on Trent, but somehow he slipped through the cracks. He failed to show up to a court hearing in December 2020, which failed to raise any alarm bells. In February 2021, officers learned that Trent had picked up a traffic violation, but again, nothing was done. It wasn't until April 2021, when he failed to show up to court again, that authorities realized something was wrong. Trent had been fitted with an ankle monitor that should have kept tabs on him, but Trent was one step ahead of the authorities. Trent had somehow managed to remove the ankle bracelet and went on the run. He visited Chevrolet dealership during this trip and asked to test drive a Chevy Tahoe. Instead of returning the car, Trent held the salesman at knife point and stole the vehicle. Trent's movements between April 2021 and December 2021 are unknown, and a nationwide manhunt was underway. The U.S. Marshals covered Texas with Trent's wanted photos, hoping that someone had seen him around, but he was long gone. For months, investigators felt that Trent was slipping out of their hands. Then, in December 2021, they received the call they'd been waiting for. A witness called the U.S. Marshals to tell them that they'd seen Trent Pascal living in a van at the Holiday Travel Park in Ocala, Florida. On December 31, 2021, local authorities cautiously approached the van Trent lived in. They gently knocked on the door, identifying themselves and asking Trent to come out. Moments later, officers heard one gunshot ring out, accompanied by a loud thud. When they made it inside the van, they found the body of Trent Pascal. Trent Pascal will never face justice for what he did, and Savannah's family is now left to pick up the pieces. What do you think about it? Tell us your thoughts in comments below. Let's continue. The evening of February 27, 2011 felt like any other for 31-year-old Ted Lampley of Cape Cod, Massachusetts. Todd, his girlfriend, and another male friend were relaxing at home and watching TV after a long day of work. At around 10 p.m., Todd's girlfriend stepped out of the room to make a phone call, and seconds later Todd was shot through the living room window. The entire house descended into panic, with the residents running and ducking for cover. When the dust had settled slightly, they heard the sound of someone making a getaway in a car. Once Todd's girlfriend and the other residents determined it to be safe, they ran to Todd's side, but it was too late. The attacker had fired 3 shots at Todd, killing him almost instantly. Thankfully, no one else at the scene was injured and the police were called to the scene. Emergency services confirmed that Todd was deceased, which upgraded the case to a homicide. Investigators immediately began combing through Todd's personal life, looking for anyone with the vendetta against him. At the crime scene, investigators found 3 spent shell casings, a black phone, and bizarrely enough, a sweet potato. Investigators were puzzled at the sweet potato's appearance at the crime scene, but it was processed as evidence nonetheless. Investigators continued to dive into the case, but little clues materialized. No one came forward, and the news shocked everyone. Days after Todd's murder, the gun used in the crime was found in a pond near Ted's home. Whilst the gun matched the casings found at the scene, investigators found it difficult to track the owner. For weeks, the case went cold until forensic analysis took a closer look at the sweet potato found at the scene. Bizarrely, the sweet potato held a DNA profile and was discovered to have been used as a silencer. The DNA was sequenced and run through databases. Amazingly, it came up with a match: DeVoris Hampton. At the time of the murder, Hampton was on tag or wearing an ankle bracelet, and investigators were able to utilize the GPS data to place Hampton at the crime scene. Investigators now had the mammoth task of retrieving a DNA sample from Hampton. Investigators carefully surveilled Hampton and were able to retrieve an item that he'd thrown away. The DNA sample was taken and investigators confirmed that DeVoris Hampton was Todd Lampley's killer. DeVoris Hampton was no stranger to local law enforcement, and in 2018 he had appeared before the courts charged with sexual assault of a child and another shooting that did not end in fatalities. Despite the solid DNA evidence against him, the Barnstable County courts and authorities had taken over 12 years to bring Hampton to justice. In early 2023, he was arrested for the murder of Todd Lampley, and the case against him is currently ongoing. The latest hearing was scheduled for April 5, 2023. Although the outcome of this hearing is currently unknown, investigators would later discover that it wasn't the first time that a sweet potato had been used in commission of a crime. The hit TV show The Wire also used a sweet potato as a silencer, although it was unknown whether this inspired Hampton. What do you think about it? Tell us your thoughts in comments below. Let's continue. On June 5, 1984, in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, Maryanne Gonzalez, who was 25 years old, disappeared without a trace. She left behind her son, her house, and her family, all wondering what had happened to her. Maryanne had recently separated from her husband, Jerry Gonzalez. They had been in a long custody battle over their only child, and the last court date was to settle child support payments, with Maryanne being granted primary custody. After the separation, Maryanne stayed in the family home while Jerry moved back in with his parents. To help with expenses, Maryanne also took in a boarder. On the morning of her disappearance, the only person to see her that morning was Jerry, her estranged husband. He would later tell the detectives that he'd gone over to the house to take Maryanne to a car dealership to trade in her vehicle. However, he said that when he arrived, she wasn't ready to leave yet, so he took his son to a nearby park, where they played for a while. When they returned to the house, Jerry claimed that Maryanne left a note on the counter stating that the car wouldn't start and she'd popped over to the corner store and would be right back. He claimed he waited for hours, but she never returned. It had been Maryanne's mother 2 days later who'd report her missing. Meanwhile, Jerry had moved back into the family home and kicked out the boarder who'd been staying there. Maryanne's mother never believed Jerry's story. Maryanne had been in a car accident a few years before her disappearance, and it had left her with a permanent limp, which she treated with a lift in her shoe. But walking was so uncomfortable for her, and her mother doubts she would ever have popped over anywhere on foot. When detectives first interviewed Jerry at the property, they noted an area of the garage that had freshly dug dirt, with cardboard over top in an attempt to remove the dirt to conceal it. When probed, Jerry gave conflicting statements about why he had dug a hole in his garage. The dug area was about 6 feet by 3 feet. Days later, they came back with a search warrant to excavate the hole. But it had again looked different than when the officer had first seen it. They dug 5 feet down, but there was no sign of anything. The search warrant was also exercised within the home, and the note that Jerry had claimed had gotten thrown away was found in the living room. The note, however, didn't say what Jerry had originally stated. The crumpled piece of paper stated, quote, "Had to run a quick errand to be right back. No mention of the car not starting or the corner store." When detectives canvassed the neighborhood, no one could recall seeing Maryanne that day. But when detectives tried to confirm Jerry's story, they discovered that he'd called into work that morning. And when he returned the following day, his coworkers noted he had bandages on his arm. Jerry had given conflicting statements about what he'd been doing that day, and no one was able to confirm his whereabouts for the day his wife had gone missing. Jerry never seemed overly concerned about where Maryanne had gone. He'd always told people that she had run away to start a new life, and would tell people often that he got postcards and calls from her. But Maryanne's family have stated that they've never heard or seen Maryanne since the day she disappeared. Also noting, none of her belongings were packed, and her bank account was never touched after she disappeared. Plus, the biggest flaw in Jerry's argument was that Maryanne loved her son and would never, ever leave him behind. Without ever finding a body, detectives didn't have enough evidence to arrest Jerry Gonzalez. So he was allowed to move on, live his life, get remarried, and concrete over his garage. In 2018, Maryanne's cold case would be reopened, with detectives going through all the original evidence in the case. The smoking gun would eventually be the note, according to Jerry, that had been written by Maryanne. Another search warrant was issued for Jerry's home on September 2022. He had never moved from the home his first wife had disappeared from. Law enforcement would collect multiple items from the home, and some of those were handwriting samples from Jerry. The samples were examined and ultimately determined to be a match to that note. Jerry had written the note, not Mary, and also searched was the backyard of the home as well as the garage area. Detectives now believe that Jerry Baginsto's murdered his wife and originally hid her body in the garage. But when detectives had poked around and asked about the freshly dug dirt, he had dug her body back up and relocated her to somewhere else. However, detectives weren't able to find her remains on the property. On December 15, 2022, Jerry Baginstos was arrested. Now 67 years old, he was charged with 1 count of criminal homicide for the murder of Maryanne. Baginstos is being held in custody while he awaits trial. He has so far pleaded not guilty. A trial date has not been set yet, but the family of Maryanne look forward to seeing Jerry Baginstos in court and hopefully receiving justice for Maryanne even after 4 decades. What do you think about it? Tell us your thoughts in comments below. Let's continue. It was the summer of 1971 when 24-year-old Rita Curran moved into a shared home in Burlington, Vermont. Rita was a school teacher, but that summer she was going to be working on her graduate degree and working as a housekeeper at a nearby motel. On July 19th, Rita returned home after a rehearsal with her a cappella singing group around 10 p.m. At the time when Rita went to bed, her roommates had all been home, but they had all left together to go get drinks at a nearby bar, leaving Rita alone. Hours later, the roommates returned home and made a horrible discovery. Bloody handprints were seen on the kitchen door, and then they found Rita's body in their room. They checked her body for a pulse, but immediately knew it was too late. She was cold to the touch. Rita had been viciously attacked. She was covered in defensive injuries, indicating that she had fought for her life, but was ultimately overpowered. An autopsy determined she'd been strangled to death. The killer had also sexually assaulted her. The crime scene was bloody and noted as particularly violent. Rita was covered in bruises. Her clothing, a robe, and nightgown had been torn in half. Several key pieces of evidence were found at the scene, which included a cigarette butt, a hair found in Rita's hand, and blood evidence that had likely come from the killer. Initially, detectives presumed it might have been a robbery gone wrong. They hypothesized that someone had been casing the house, saw the 3 roommates leave, and took that opportunity to rob the home, but discovered Rita was still there. But that was quickly ruled out when they discovered Rita's purse still had cash in it, as well as her car keys, and her car were found undisturbed. Next, the detectives went about to establish how the killer had gotten into the apartment. There had been no signs of forced entry or anything to indicate which door the killer had come in. The blood evidence on the back door indicated which door the killer had gone out of. They interviewed the roommates and asked about their door locking habits, and they revealed they only had 1 key that they all shared. When they had left Rita to go to the bar that night, they had left both the front and back door unlocked. The roommates were all cleared as suspects, as well as their boyfriends. Neighbors were also interviewed, which included a newly married couple that rented the apartment 2 floors above the girls. According to them, they didn't hear anything, and they both were each other's alibi, so they were ruled out as well. The investigation had gone on for months, with hundreds of hours dedicated to solving Rita's murder, but ultimately there wasn't enough evidence to get a solid suspect. Unfortunately, during that time, there had been a string of violent attacks on women. None appeared connected to Rita's case. In 1984, following the arrest of well-known serial killer Ted Bundy, Burlington PD established a theory that Rita may have been one of his early victims. They thought there might have been a connection because the motel Rita worked at was close to where Bundy had been born. Bundy was asked several times if he'd killed Rita Curran, and he denied it until his execution in 1989. Later, his DNA was tested against the DNA found at the crime scene, and Bundy was ultimately ruled out as a suspect. Throughout the years, the case was reopened multiple times. Rita's parents passed, never knowing what happened to their daughter, though her siblings would continue to search for justice. In 2014, evidence in the case was retested. They got a solid DNA profile from the cigarette butt found at the crime scene. It was entered into Cody's, but never led to an identification. In 2021, 50 years had passed since Rita's murder. It grew to be the oldest case in Burlington PD history. It was then that the evidence was, again, re-examined with new forensic techniques. And they got more DNA evidence from the housecoat, nightgown, and linoleum in the bedroom, which ultimately was tied back to the same DNA found on the cigarette. After 5 decades, many of the original suspects were long gone, but detectives reached out to one of the neighbors one more time, the wife of the couple who lived 2 floors above Frida. But this time, her story had changed since 1971. When re-interviewed, she said that her husband at the time, William DeRouse, had instructed her to say that he'd been with her all night. She said at the time she hadn't been concerned. Her husband had said his criminal history would make him an automatic suspect, and she felt that made sense and lied to the police. In actuality, her lie had given her sleepless nights because he hadn't been with her. She revealed that evening they had their first big fight since their marriage, and he had, quote, gone for a walk to let off steam and come back sometime after midnight, giving her husband about an hour and a half of time completely unaccounted for. She revealed that after Rita's death, her marriage with William had quickly spiraled downwards. They would eventually divorce in the 2-part ways. As far as she knew, it had been William's plan to move to Thailand to become a Buddhist monk. Detectives began to piece together William Jarrah's life after he moved from Vermont. They found that he'd gotten remarried in San Francisco in 1974, and that marriage was also quickly absolved when his second wife learned of his violent tendencies. When asked about her marriage, she told detectives she witnessed him stabbing a friend in the abdomen completely out of the blue, and she had quickly left him when they were having dinner one night and he started to strangle her suddenly without any provocation, pack her bags, and flee the marriage. William DeRuise died in 1983 of a drug overdose alone in a motel in San Francisco. DNA evidence confirmed that DeRuise had murdered Rita Curran. During a press conference, C.C. Moore, the head geologist at Parabon Nanolab, said, "Even though he's dead and there won't be justice, it is really a positive outcome. Rita's siblings are grateful to have answers as to who killed their sister. They thanked Burlington PD for their years of hard work to close the investigation." What do you think about it? Tell us your thoughts in comments below. Let's continue. It had been around Halloween in 2001 when 19-year-old Amanda Gonzalez called her mother, Gloria Bates, while deployed at a military base in Germany. During that call, Amanda revealed that she was 4 months pregnant. It had been a surprise, but welcomed, and Amanda and her mother talked at length. After the call, Gloria booked plane tickets for her daughter to come home for Christmas. Amanda was on her first deployment, and she was enjoying Germany, but her first year in the military was proving a little bit of a challenge. The work itself was fine. She was a private and worked as a cook on the base. Amanda had always wanted to help people. She'd always been a bright student in school and had dreams of becoming a physiotherapist for children, and it had shocked her family when she came home and enlisted in the military. She had planned to serve her time and use her GI Bill to cover her schooling to be a physiotherapist. The military also gave her the opportunity to travel the world, and when the chance came to go to Europe came up, Amanda signed up. She did disclose to her mom that she was experiencing bullying from other military personnel, but she believed it wasn't anything she couldn't handle. Amanda had always been independent and was known to hold her own. In the military, her nickname had been Firecracker. However, Amanda never made it back to Texas for Christmas. On November 5th, Amanda failed to report to work. She was found in the 3rd floor barracks. Her cause of death was determined to be asphyxiation, and experts determined her time of death was likely 2 days before she'd been found. Now, many details of Amanda's murder investigation are not public since the investigation was being handled by both the FBI and the military. We don't know what evidence was collected or how many suspects were developed. For the next 2 decades, Gloria Bates advocated for her daughter. She wrote to members of Congress and various TV shows like Dr. Phil in America's Most Wanted. Anything to bring media attention, making sure Amanda's murder wasn't swept under the rug. When Vanessa Guilin was murdered in Fort Hood by a fellow soldier, it brought up waves of emotion for Gloria, who couldn't help but notice similarities to Amanda's murder. Then, after 21 years, Gloria received a call from the FBI. They'd made an arrest. Shannon L. Wilkerson, now 42, was arrested in Florida for the murder of Private Amanda Gonzalez. At the time of the murder, Wilkerson was a member of the armed forces, but soon after was discharged from the military. Wilkerson was charged under the military extraterritorial. He faces a sentence of life in prison and has so far pleaded not guilty. I'm not sure if we'll hear more about this case when it goes to trial, but if you want me to keep an eye on this case, let me know in the comments below. On July 29, 2000, 5-year-old Irana de Jesus went missing in Hunting Park, Philadelphia. She was last seen playing outside her house. When her mother called her inside, she couldn't find her. Her mother reported her missing, and the police and the community began searching for her. There weren't many clues in the case. Witnesses said they saw Irana with a Hispanic man, who they think was a traveler who had just arrived in town. He had introduced himself as Carlos. He had been working off the books for a local man doing handiwork. He was believed to have stayed in the apartment where the girl was found. Unfortunately, that is where the leads ended until 2004, when a man named Alexis Flores was arrested for forgery. As with many felonies, a DNA sample was taken and entered into the database when he was convicted and incarcerated. That DNA sample would eventually match the DNA found at the scene of Irana's murder. Unfortunately, before that DNA had confirmed a match, Alexis Flores, an illegal immigrant, was immediately deported to his home country of Honduras during his release from prison in 2005. In 2007, the FBI and Philadelphia authorities announced that Alexis Flores was the prime suspect in Irana's murder. In March 2007, an arrest warrant was issued for Flores. On June 2, 2007, Alexis Flores was added to the FBI's top 10 most wanted fugitives and is currently still on that list. He is a 487th person to be added to the list. There is also an active Interpol red notice for Flores. Flores' last known location was Honduras, but the FBI believes that he may have moved back to the US in 2005. He'd be 39 years old today. He is described as a Hispanic male, 5 feet 4 inches, slim build with scars on his forehead and right cheek. Known aliases are Mario Flores, Mario Roberto Flores, Mario F. Roberto, Alex Contreras, Alexis Contreras. The FBI has a $100,000 reward for any information that leads to the arrest. If you have any information concerning this person, please contact your local FBI office or the nearest American embassy or consulate. What do you think about it? Tell us your thoughts in comments below. Let's continue. It was in August 1980 when the body of a man was found in his truck in Eagle Mountain, California. The body was hard to identify as the truck had been blown up with explosives. The man would be later identified through dental records as Kim LaValle. Law enforcement would discover that 2 men were involved in the murder: Frank Soto Jr., who would testify against the second man, Glenn Godwin. Godwin and his roommate Frank Soto planned to rob a known dealer and pilot, Kim LaValle. He was known to traffic marijuana from Mexico to the United States by plane. Godwin used to know Kim, and it was known that the two didn't like each other. The two got Kim over to their apartment in Palm Springs, California, where Godwin is alleged to have beaten and then stabbed Kim at least 26 times. They then drove him in his truck, put home explosives on his body, and blew up the truck, hoping to hide his identity. Both men were charged with first-degree murder. However, Soto was the only one in the room. Godwin was charged, but because of the felony murder rule, which is a law in most states that allows anyone accused of committing a violent felony to be charged with murder if that felony results in the death of someone. Soto also testified against Godwin. Godwin was convicted and sentenced to 26 years to life in March 1981. This was Godwin's first conviction, and Soto was also convicted and is currently serving his life sentence. In 1987, Godwin attempted to escape from Dual Vocational Institute in California. After that attempt, he was moved to Folsom State Prison, a maximum security prison. Only 5 months after being moved to Folsom, Godwin, with the help of his then-wife, who he married while incarcerated, and another inmate, managed to smuggle in supplies, including a hacksaw. He managed to cut a hole in his bars, climbed into a manhole, and crawled 1,000 feet to the American River. The bars at the opening of the river had also been sawed. Investigators believe that this is where an accomplice left a raft or a boat that he used to float down the river following arrows that had been marked on rocks. The authorities started to look for his wife and asked the public for help. In 1990, she was arrested after her neighbor had seen the episode of America's Most Wanted about her now ex-husband. His wife, Shelley Godwin, had remarried and was living a quiet life in Texas. Not much was released about her arrest or whether she was charged or let go. There were articles in 1990 that showed that her current husband would stand beside her. Godwin fled to Mexico. In Mexico, he got into some trouble for drug dealing. He wasn't very good at it, because he was arrested in Puerto Vallarta, Mexico for drug trafficking and sentenced to 7 years in prison. He was serving his sentence at Jalisco State Penitentiary. U.S. authorities were trying to get him extradited back to California. In April 1991, he reportedly killed a fellow inmate in Mexico, delaying his extradition. He was due to be released to U.S. custody in late 1991, but in September, he escaped from the Mexico prison. There's little information on exactly how he escaped prison. Glenn Stewart Godwin was added to the FBI's 10 most wanted fugitives in 1991. He was the 447th person added to the list and was removed in May 2016. He is still at large and is considered extremely dangerous. The FBI currently has a $20,000 reward for any information that leads to his capture. He is wanted for escaping prison and to finish his murder sentence. Godwin is described as 6 feet tall, Caucasian, with black salt and pepper hair, a medium build and green eyes. Godwin is fluent in Spanish and is believed to be traveling through Mexico or Central America. Godwin remains one of the only successful prisoners to escape from Folsom Prison. What do you think about it? Tell us your thoughts in comments below. Let's continue. On November 29, 2004, 24-year-old Robert Keith Palomares, an armored car guard, was leaving an AMC movie theater in Phoenix, Arizona with about $56,000 in deposits. When a man wearing a dark hoodie or jacket stepped out from behind the ticket booth, the man shot 6 times at Robert. 5 of these shots were headshots. Robert's partner was in the truck, as is the protocol when picking up deposits. Robert didn't even have enough time to draw his weapon. The suspect then stole the money bag and rode off on a black and red mountain bike. Robert was pronounced dead at the scene and he was shot with a .45 caliber handgun. Reporters initially said a witness described the man as being 25 to 30-year-old Hispanic man. The bike was discovered by a police helicopter and sniffed out by a police dog abandoned in a nearby alley. Forensics were able to get fingerprints from the bike, and in early December they announced a suspect, Jason Derek Brown. On December 4, 2004, an arrest warrant for first-degree murder and armed robbery was issued for Brown. 2 days later, a federal warrant was issued for unlawful flight to avoid prosecution. Jason Brown had ridden the bike to a BMW car waiting in the alley. The bike was then abandoned. At some point, he got to Las Vegas, where he exchanged the BMW for a black Cadillac. Jason Derek Brown is reported to have owned a business called Toys Unlimited in Salt Lake City, Utah. Brown had bought a Glock semi-automatic handgun a few weeks before the shooting, which matched the caliber of the gun used at the shooting. He also took a concealed handgun course, which he did pass. At the course, he was fingerprinted, and those were sent to federal databases. In 2005, his brother, David John II, was arrested for obstruction of justice. It is believed that Brown had mailed his brother clothing, gold, equipment, and that he had been involved in cleaning his brother's BMW after the shooting. David John Brown was convicted in 2007 and had to serve 3 years on probation. Jason Derek Brown is described as a Caucasian male, 5 feet 10 inches, with blonde hair and blue eyes, with a surfer dude look. He was known to love being the center of attention and enjoyed showing off expensive cars, boats, and other accessories. The FBI reported that he has a master's degree in international business, speaks fluent French, and did a Mormon mission in France for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Jason Brown faced some financial problems in Salt Lake City, and he put himself into considerable debt. That is believed to be the motive for the heist. On December 7, 2007, Brown was the 489th person to be added to the FBI's top 10 most wanted list with a $100,000 reward. Over the years, the FBI has received thousands of tips of sightings of Brown. Brown is believed to have a resemblance to the actor Sean Penn. One of his body doubles had even been arrested after a tip believed him to be Jason Brown. There have been reports that he has been seen all over the States as well as Canada. There has been one confirmed sighting in 2008. An acquaintance who had been on a Mormon mission to France had spotted him at a traffic light near the Hoggle Zoo in Salt Lake City. He was described as having longer hair than past wanted posters, and they believe that Brown must have been in the area to visit friends or family. Since the 2008 sighting, no other confirmed sightings of Brown have been confirmed. In March 2013, the FBI announced an increase of the reward to $200,000 in the hopes of finding Brown. But in September 2022, Jason Brown was removed from the top 10 most wanted without being captured. That doesn't mean the FBI has stopped looking, just that the list exposures can now get more recent criminal activity. He is still considered wanted and dangerous with ties in California, Arizona, and Utah. He may have traveled to France or Mexico. He is believed to still be in possession of a Glock 9mm. Please get in touch with the FBI if you have any information on Jason Brown. What do you think about it? Tell us your thoughts in comments below. Let's continue. On March 2, 1976 in Tyrell County, North Carolina, 5 bodies were found in shallow graves that had been set on fire, 2 women and 3 boys. There was not much evidence and the North Carolina authorities were stumped. On March 8, the Montgomery County Police in Maryland went to the home of William Bradford Bishop Jr. after neighbors reported not seeing the family for a few days, which was unusual. The family's Volkswagen was still in the driveway, but their Chevrolet station wagon was not. When police arrived, they found a trail of blood from the driveway to the front door. Inside the house was a gruesome scene and blood was everywhere. They found a bloody scene in all the bedrooms. The family had a golden retriever that was not found in the home. Shortly after, the burned victims were identified through dental records. They were identified as the Bishop family. Annette Bishop, 37, Brad, 14, Brent, 10, Joffrey, 5, as well as William's mother, Lobelia. However, there was no sign of William Bishop anywhere. It was like he had just vanished. Police initially thought that he might have been killed as well, but they hadn't found the body with the rest of the family, nor did they find any blood evidence. On March 18, 1976, authorities found Bishop's maroon Chevrolet station wagon at a remote campsite in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park in Tennessee. They found an axe and a shotgun. The back of the station was full of blood. Some reports said that the spare tire well was filled with a pool of blood. The blood was tested by blood type as this was 1976. Bishop's blood type was not found in the car, only that of his children, wife, and mother, who had worked for the State Department overseas. He speaks English, French, Italian, Spanish, and Serbo-Croatian. He held a diplomatic passport. Bishop's last known and confirmed sighting was March 2, 1976, when he used his credit card in Jacksonville, North Carolina, about 100 miles south of Tyrell County, where his family's bodies were found. There, he bought $15.50 worth of sporting goods. Police interviewed family, friends, and neighbors and hundreds of other people. They could not find any reason as to why this had happened. They believed Bishop had done the crime, but could not find any reason why he did it. He was successful and they couldn't find anyone that knew of marital problems or mental health issues, and now Bishop had weeks of a head start. About 6 months after the murder and disappearance, William Bradford Jr. was officially charged with the murders. The FBI was now hunting for him for unlawful flight to avoid prosecution. The following is what authorities believe to have happened. On March 1st, Bishop left work complaining of having the flu. He then went and bought a sledgehammer and a gas can, filled the car and the gas can, then went and bought a shovel and a pitchfork. He then drove home around 7 or 8 p.m., killed his family, loaded them in the car, and brought the dog with him. He then drove around 300 miles to Tyrell County to dig a shallow grave and set his family on fire. He then went and bought shoes at a sporting goods store. Some reported they saw the dog while others did not. He then drove another 400 miles and dumped the car. This is the working theory. The dog was never found. He could have been let loose or still with Bishop. It's not known. By the time the family was identified and Bishop believed missing, he could have traveled anywhere. He had training and expertise with the State Department. In the months following, the police would discover that Bishop had been seeing a psychiatrist. Actually, he'd been seeing more than one over the years. None of his friends or family knew about it, and they discovered that he had insomnia. Still didn't answer why he snapped, or if it was really him. There have been reported sightings worldwide, including Italy, Belgium, England, Finland, Netherlands, Germany, Greece, Spain, Sweden, and Switzerland. Bishop had been in the military, he'd worked counterintelligence, he'd worked overseas for the military and the State Department. He had all kinds of skills to just disappear. On April 10, 2014, Bishop was added to the FBI's 10 most wanted list 38 years after his crimes. He was the 504th person added and stayed on the list until 2018. In 2014, they also did age progression to age 67 and released photos of a bust. Also is on an Interpol red notice. In 2021, the FBI confirmed that a woman who had used a home DNA test for 23andMe had worked to figure out that her biological father was the daughter of William Bradford Bishop. After the woman had come forward, the FBI used DNA found in a cigarette but that had been left in Bishop's car, and they confirmed that she was his daughter. The woman had been adopted in 1976. She was 18 at the time of the murders. The FBI believes that this is the first break in the case in decades. The FBI had looked extensively into Bishop's past until the day he'd gone missing. There was no information about an affair or that he'd gotten a woman pregnant before his wife. This shows a side of Bishop that they knew nothing about. Some authorities now believe William Bradford Bishop has died from the elements after abandoning his car. Some believe he fled to Europe and has lived his life. Some believe he must have died of old age by now, and Bishop would be 86 years old today. His FBI wanted posters describe him as, quote, Bishop was and may still be an avid outdoorsman, camper, and hiker. He had extensive camping experience in Africa. He also enjoyed canoeing, fishing, swimming, jogging, tennis, skiing, and riding motorcycles. Bishop enjoyed working out several times a week. He also is a licensed amateur pilot who learned how to fly in Botswana, Africa. Bishop has an American Studies degree from Yale University and a master's degree in Italian from Midbury College in Vermont. He has also read extensively and may have kept a diary or journal. A longtime insomniac, Bishop purported to have been under psychiatric care in the past and used medication for depression. He drank scotch and wine and enjoyed eating peanuts and spicy food. Bishop was described as intense, self-absorbed, prone to violent outbursts, and preferred a neat and orderly environment. The FBI is still looking for any information on Bishop, and they still receive tips almost daily. What do you think happened to Bishop? Is he still alive out there somewhere? What do you think about it? Tell us your thoughts in comments below. Let's continue. On June 16, 1974, two men were looking for driftwood near burnt bridges on A1A near Singer Island, Palm Beach, Florida. While walking through the swampy mangrove, they spotted something in the distance. Upon closer inspection, they discovered human bones scattered around, likely due to animals. The two men contacted law enforcement, and the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office began investigating. As mentioned, most of the bones were spread out across the swamp. Investigators found that some of the bones had been bound with wire, and there was even evidence to suggest that the person had been tied up to a nearby tree prior to their death. The medical examiner completed an autopsy, but failed to uncover the exact cause of death. In their report, the medical examiner and forensic anthropologist determined that the remains belonged to a white female between the ages of 14 and 25, around 4 feet 11 inches to 5 feet 2 inches and 83 to 120 pounds with strawberry blonde hair. Few conclusions could be drawn from the bones as only partial remains were recovered. At the scene, investigators discovered a black knitted sweater that was littered with what they believed to be bullet holes. medical examiner determined that this was a homicide, and that the girl had likely endured a cruel death. The postmortem index determined that the time of death could have been anything from a few weeks to 8 months, giving investigators even less to work with. Missing persons cases in the area were cross-referenced, but none matched these remains. In the absence of a name, she was dubbed the Palm Beach Jane Doe, might hold the key to her identity. One article noted that the Jane Doe's teeth had 3 filled cavities and 3 more in need of dental work. Despite this unique dental pattern, investigators again failed to find any matches. Years would pass without a word, and the Palm Beach Jane Doe case went cold. Whenever investigators had free time, they would glance over the case file, hoping to find that golden lead. Many decades later, the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office reached out to Othram Incorporated and asked for their assistance in this case. Incredibly, Othram was able to extract and develop a DNA profile from the partial remains recovered in 1974. Othram Labs put out a press release and stated that their genealogists had found possible family members within months. From there, the Palm Beach County Police Department stepped in and spoke to these family members. Those who cooperated gave DNA samples. Weeks later, the results were in. Othram's genealogists had been correct. In June 2022, Othram and the Palm Beach County Police Department went public and announced the remains discovered in 1974 belonged to 15-year-old Suzanne Gailpool. Suzanne, or Susan as she was also called, was born on February 12, 1957, and lived with her family at a trailer park in Fort Lauderdale. By 1972, Susan had dropped out of school and began living with her friends at Wilton Manor's apartment part-time. In December 1972, Susan dropped off the map and was never seen or heard from again. Her family discovered that she'd left all of her personal items at her friend's apartment. In late December 1972, her parents reported her missing. 2 years later, Susan's remains would be discovered in the remote mangrove, and she remained unidentified for almost 50 years. By the time Othram had successfully identified her, her mother was in her late 90s and feared that she would never find out what happened to her daughter. The Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office believes that Susan was a victim of the infamous serial killer Gerard Schaefer, who had worked as a Wilton Manor's police officer in late 1972 and later became a sheriff's deputy. Schaefer is known to have killed at least 2 girls in the area, but investigators believe that he is responsible for many more because he was in the possession of numerous personal items detectives believe were trophies from victims. He was convicted of murdering 2 girls by taking them out to the mangroves and tying them to trees. He died in prison in 1995. No physical evidence links Schaefer to Susan's murder. Detectives are investigating all angles. If anyone knew Susan in 1972, they're being asked to contact the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Detective William Springer. They're looking for friends who might be familiar with Susan's personal effects to look through the items found in Schaefer's possession and hope someone can tie some of these items back to Susan. Ideally, they would like to speak to 4 Julie Hunt and Michelle Williamson, all from the Broward County, Florida in 1972. What do you think about it? Tell us your thoughts in comments below. Let's continue. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the depths of unsolved mysteries. Cold cases not only challenge our understanding of the past, but also ignite our curiosity and determination for answers. Remember to subscribe to stay updated on our latest investigations. And if you have any information regarding the cases we've covered, don't hesitate to reach out. Together, we can shed light on the shadows of the past and bring closure to those who seek it. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and never stop seeking the truth.